Everyone, I'm JG and welcome back to MusicForever, where today we're talking about Linkin Park's third studio album, Minutes to Midnight. Now, before starting the actual review here today, I just want to remind anyone who may be new to the channel that I'm reviewing all of Linkin Park's albums here on my album, and not on my album, on my channel. Silly mistake. But pretty much there's a playlist that you could check out that's going to be linked in the description down below, as well as on screen here at the end of the video, that you could click on and it'll take you to the playlist, and it has all my Linkin Park reviews in there that I've done so far, and then of course those are the only ones for the albums that came before Minutes to Midnight, and the reviews for the albums that came after Minutes to Midnight should be coming in the near future, so you want to make sure you're subscribed to the channel so you don't miss out on those. And, now that that's over, let's get started with this review, because, Minutes to Midnight, there's a lot to talk about here with this album. Arguably, it's a very important album for Linkin Park in terms of, changing up their sound and things of that sort. Hybrid Theory and Meteora, the two albums that preceded it, were definitely more of a new metal, kind of alternative metal, rap metal effort that was kind of popular at the time of those albums released, the late 90s, early 2000s. That type of music was really popular. But by 2007, when this album was released, that wasn't really the case anymore. And of course, they kind of go for a sound here that I guess you would say was kind of leaving those sounds that they were doing before and going for a more type of alternative rock, just kind of more rock-oriented genre direction, I guess you could say. The hip-hop influences on this album are definitely toned back a lot. For example, Mike Shinoda doesn't really rap a lot here on this album. He only raps on 2 songs here. And he does do some singing on some other songs, so he definitely is still present here, besides from his inclusions doing guitars and keyboards and stuff like that. But, the rapping itself doesn't appear very often here on this project. Besides from that, just kind of like Mr. Johan's scratching with the keyboard is also not very present, at least in a very kind of obvious way like it was on Hybrid Theory and Meteora. The drums and other instruments doing more of a hip-hop based sound is also just not really present here on this album. It's just really more of a rock record than it is kind of like a fusion between hip-hop and rock, which is definitely a difference from their previous 2 works. But that doesn't necessarily make this album bad, mind you. There's a lot of interesting stuff to be provided here on this album. The album starts off with the track Wake, which is just kind of an instrumental song that kind of, sets the mood for this project. It starts off and it's an enjoyable track. It's not my favorite Linkin Park instrumental by any means, but it starts off the album well enough, to be honest. And then it's followed up immediately by Given Up, which I think is a nice bridge between the old and the new in terms of Linkin Park and their sound, because it does have that very aggressive sound, and Chester doing his screams and all that stuff. That's kind of reminiscent of their older albums, but at the same time, it lacks all those hip-hop elements I was talking about before that their older works did have. This song is just more of a straightforward kind of rock song, even a bit of punk mixed in there, to be honest, and it works still. Even without the hip-hop kind of elements, it's just a kind of a straightforward, aggressive track. But immediately after that, it's followed up by Leave Out All the Rest, which is more of a softer kind of sound. And to be honest, I do really enjoy this song, and I've been avoiding talking about Chester's death in excess here on these reviews, because I don't want to make all these videos kind of about that, to be honest, even though this whole series, I guess you could say, is a tribute to him. But, I can't really ignore it when listening to this song, because the song was literally about, kind of the perspective of him talking about his own death. Of course, he didn't exactly predict his own death. Of course, this album was released 10 years ago, but, it's still somewhat creepy to listen to. It's just kind of haunting in that sense, and the lyrics definitely do stand out as a result of that. And the more mellow tone is something that would be really apparent throughout the rest of this album, as well as some later Linkin Park works as well. It's not aggressive or in your face. It's just, a bit softer. And many people didn't like that, but I do enjoy it here. But if that wasn't something that you're interested in, the following track, Bleed It Out, is something that I think you really will be, because this song is arguably the closest Linkin Park get to their older sound here on this project. And it's the only track on this album I would really consider kind of a rap rock, kind of rap metal song. Because it does kind of follow that typical formula that they had on the first 2 albums, with Mike rapping the verses and Chester screaming the choruses and things like that. It's a very enjoyable song. It's not one of my favorites here, but it definitely is a really fun song to listen to. And it is kind of reminiscent of their older works, and that's why I think many people may be gravitating towards this track. And then immediately it's followed by Shadow of the Day, which is another sort of softer type track. And once again, the lyrics kind of stand out for reasons similar to Leave Out All the Rest. And I just do like the mellow mood of this track. And then there's a guitar solo thrown in as well. That's another thing about this album. Linkin Park have a bit more guitar solos here than they really did on their previous efforts. Actually, I don't think they had any on their previous 2 albums. But this album here kind of starts off the trend of Linkin Park occasionally using guitar solos in their work. And it's very enjoyable here on this track. I just do like the mellow mood of this track as a whole. and then before it moves into what I've done, which is more kind of just like a mid-paced sort of rock song. It's arguably the most popular song here on the album. You're probably familiar with it, and it's just a really enjoyable song as well, in my opinion. The track that follows that, Hands Held High, is the more other hip-hop oriented song here on the album. This one actually reminds me a lot of Mike Shinoda's solo project, Fort Minor, which did have an album release prior to the release of Minutes to Midnight. I believe it was in 2005 that album was released. But, you know, which just has more of an alternative hip-hop approach to this track as a whole. And I do believe Chester Bennington does do backing vocals here at one point towards the end of the song with the singing part, but it's mostly a hip-hop song, to be completely honest, with, you know, Mike rapping most of the time and, you know, paying attention to his lyrics here being the most prominent point here. And this song also introduces another kind of change for Linkin Park. Whereas their earlier albums were more focused on angst and anger in terms of the lyrics, this album kind of opens the door to experimenting new things lyrically. One of those being politics. And this song is an obviously a political song, to be honest, talking about the president at the time and just kind of what was going on in the world at that time period. As well as the closing track here on the album, Little Things That Gave You Away, which is my favorite song here on the album, and a really underrated Linkin Park song. This song, the longest on the album, it just kind of has a bit of a slow start to it, but it builds up energy later on. It doesn't get to be like super intense or angry or anything like that, but it does kind of build up at the pace, or pick up the pace later on. And once again, the lyrics here are political, talking about Hurricane Katrina and kind of how people in that incident were kind of reacting to that. Chester sings on the chorus of the song, all you wanted was someone to look up to you, and 6 feet under I do, of course kind of being a reference to, you know, people being dead as a result, and now as a result, you know, dead in the ground, they're literally looking up. And it's very interesting in that regard. I definitely recommend you check out the song just for like the message and lyrics alone. I do like the scratching here on this track. I mentioned that there wasn't too many like obvious points where Johan is kind of scratching like crazy here on this album. But this track, it is a bit more obvious, even if it's not in a super like hip hop based way. It's still really cool, the effect that he uses here. And I just really like the sound of this track overall. Mike Shinoda, I believe, does backing vocals here, and it's overall just a really beautiful song, and it's a nice way to close out this album. Now, I mostly talked about the first half of the album so far, and in terms of tone, I would say that the first half of the album is kind of bouncing back and forth between aggressive and not so aggressive. Like I said, you kind of start off with Wake and Giving Up, which are just kind of like together. I kind of imagine them because Wake is just kind of like the introduction to Giving Up, which are more aggressive, and it bounces to Leave Out All the Rest, which is softer, and then Bleed It Out, which is more aggressive, and Child of the Day, which is softer. But the second half of this project, and which I think is the weakest point of this album, is the fact that all the songs here on the second half of the album are slower in terms of their pace. Even like Hands Held High is, while it does have a bit of anger in the lyrics, the song itself doesn't exactly get super aggressive in terms of the instrumentation or anything like that. You do have No More Sorrow in there, which is a very aggressive song, kind of breaking up the pace, but it is a good song, but you still have a lot of slower tracks put together. Take, for example, a track In Between, which is where Mike Shinoda kind of has his first lead vocal part that isn't rapping, where he's singing instead. And while that is kind of a cool thing, I do like some of the tracks, some of the things this track does in terms of like having more of an atmospheric mood to it. It's just kind of boring in my opinion. It's not one of my favorites here, and I really don't care for it all too much. You also have In Pieces, which is an interesting song to say the least. It is a bit slower, but it does have a really cool guitar solo in there, which is worth checking out, to be honest. You also have Valentine's Day, which, while it kind of is a slower song, and you might think it's about a relationship because, you know, Valentine's Day, it's actually not. It's about Chester Bennington's father and his death, and, you know, Chester, I would believe it was on a Valentine's Day, and that's why he's kind of singing about that here, which is kind of a unique twist on that whole concept, and it definitely is a really sad song as a result of that. The thing is, the majority of the second half of this album is not that the songs are bad, to be honest. In fact, many of them are really good, to be honest. Even In Between, which is my least favorite one, is still a good song. It's just that when they're all put together, like, straight in a row, with the exception of, like, No More Sorrow breaking it up, it all just kind of blurs together at times, and it just feels a bit slow overall. I can imagine why lots of people said that Linkin Park were doing a lot softer stuff here. It's just really at the end of this project, it's just soft, kind of slower stuff all the way through for the most part. And like I said, I do like a lot of the songs here. The last track, Little Things, is my favorite song on the album. It's just that the first half of this album does show you some more aggressive moments, but those don't really follow up in the later part of the album, with the exception of No More Sorrow, like I said before. Overall, I didn't actually anticipate on talking about all the tracks here on the album. It's just really how it ended up happening here for this review. And I think it's just important to notice kind of the pattern Linkin Park were going for here. I feel like this album was kind of a transitional album between the angrier earlier albums and the more mature later efforts from this group. Kind of like Linkin Park's teenager years, I guess, to some degree. I like how they were able to provide some more mature lyrics here on this project, talking about some newer subject matters like politics and other personal experiences, like on Valentine's Day, for example. But there are still some more aggressive moments, like Giving Up, for example, if you're into that type of stuff. I like just how it's more mature compared to their earlier works. But at the same time, I don't like this album more than their first two albums, just given the fact that the end of the album does kind of like just feel a bit sluggish at times. This is by no means a bad album, however. I don't want to give that impression at all. This is a very good album, in my opinion. It's just not one of my favorites from Linkin Park, to be honest. However, if you're a Linkin Park fan and you haven't listened to this album, I definitely recommend you do so because it is a good album. And if you're looking to get into Linkin Park, this might actually be a good starting place for the band if you're unfamiliar with this type of music in general, because it does show a lot of the things Linkin Park are able to do. It shows the more aggressive side. It shows the softer side in a lot more amount than the more aggressive side that is. But, you know, it's a good album in my opinion. Not one of my favorites from Linkin Park, but definitely an interesting album to talk about, and definitely an interesting collection of songs that we get here. So overall, I'd have to recommend it, to be honest. I think that sums up everything I want to say before I just start rambling here. So if you enjoyed the video, I'd greatly appreciate if you leave a like, subscribe to the channel, you know, check out those other Linkin Park videos I did. Once again, the link is in the description, and it will be on screen once this video ends. Follow me on all the social medias that are linked in the description. Leave a like. I think I said that already. Yeah, thanks guys. Stay golden.